In Ash Hollow, cruelty was a pastime. One winter night, a weary rancher cut a young woman free from the post they tied her to, only to see the scars they mocked her for. Her voice was steady, her eyes unbroken as she whispered, "I'm just bait." Snow drifted low across the flats as Elias Carradine rode into Ash Hollow at dusk. The settlement lay crouched in the valley like a beaten dog, its crooked line of shacks and false-fronted stores leaning into the wind. Lanterns burned behind, frosted glass giving off a faint orange glow that reminded him of hearth fires long dead. His horse, a rangy bay with more bones than flesh, labored through the crusted snow. Elias kept one hand on the reins, the other resting near the rifle sheathed at his saddle, though no trouble yet stirred in the street. He had not come for trouble, he had come for quiet. Elias was a man carved by years, once a Union scout in the war, now a ranch hand drifting from county to county. A widower, a father estranged from the only son he had, he sought no company. His wife's face haunted him with every sunrise, and her death lay on him like a brand. The fever had taken her fast. He had buried her himself, the earth half frozen, and stubborn, his hands cracked and bleeding from the shovel. After that, silence had seemed the only companion he deserved. But silence could not feed a man, and so work had drawn him here. As he passed through Ash Hollow's single street, he felt the townsfolk's eyes trail him, quiet stares, whispers at his back. Men at the saloon doorway leaned against the posts, their hats low, measuring him as though he carried his sins written across his saddlebags. He had seen that look before. Some knew his name, or thought they did. Rumors clung to old soldiers, like burrs in wool, stories of what a man had done or failed to do when the smoke cleared. He ignored them, dismounted stiffly, and tied the bay outside the trading post. The wind cut sharp through his coat as he pushed the door open. Inside smelled of leather, tobacco, and stale flour. He moved down the aisles slow, taking stock of coffee, beans, lamp oil. His coins were few, but enough. He placed his goods on the counter, ready to make his purchase, when the laughter outside broke the hush. It was not the laughter of joy but of cruelty, sharp, cutting, triumphant. Elias stepped back into the cold. There by the corral post stood a young woman, bound by ropes at the wrists. Her dark hair hung in two braids loose from the struggle, and a torn shawl clung to her shoulders. A gang of settlers ringed her, drink sour on their breath, their boots stamping the snow into mud. They jeered at her, spitting words like stones. "Bait," one called. "She's just bait for the raiders, boys. Leave her out and see what comes sniffin'." "Half-blood," another sneered. "Neither red nor white. Best use for her is what you see." Their laughter rang ugly in the dusk. Elias's jaw tightened. He had seen enough men tied to posts in his life. Soldiers, prisoners, innocents caught in the tide of war. The sight turned his stomach. Without speaking, he strode forward. The woman lifted her head as he approached. Her eyes were steady, dark, pools that gave nothing away. The men quieted, waiting to see if he meant to join the sport. Elias pulled his knife from his belt, cut the rope from her wrists, and let it fall. She flexed her hands slowly. Raw skin revealed where the cords had dug in. She did not thank him. She only looked at him, gaze unwavering, and in a low voice, murmured, "I'm just bait." The words fell between them like a stone into still water, rippling outward. Elias felt something shift in his chest, though he could not name it. He reached to steady her as she staggered, and it was then he saw the truth beneath the torn shawl. Down her jaw and neck ran scars, burn marks, seared deep into her flesh as though someone had pressed fire against her skin to brand her with shame. The marks twisted her once smooth features, yet her gaze did not waver. He recoiled before he could stop himself. The movement was small, a step, a breath drawn sharp, but the onlookers caught it. Smirks spread across their faces, satisfaction at seeing another man shrink from her touch. "She ain't fit for a man's hand," one muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Best leave carrion to the crows," said another. Elias's mouth tightened. He turned, sheathing his knife, and walked away. His boots crunched in the snow, his shoulders hunched against more than the wind. He did not look back, though her figure burned into his mind. The braids, the scars, the dignity she refused to surrender even as mockery circled her. Back at his horse, he laid a hand on the saddle horn, steadying himself. The bay's breath steamed in the cold. He should ride on, should leave Ash Hollow to its cruelties and find work farther north. Yet, something in the woman's words clung to him. I'm just bait. Not a plea, not a lament, but a truth spoken flat and unadorned, as though her life had been measured and weighed and she had found herself set aside for others' purposes. Elias untied the reins, mounted slow, and guided his horse away from the corral. The laughter behind him dimmed, swallowed by snow and distance. Still, he could not shake the image. Her wrists raw, her shawl torn, her scars catching the lantern glow. The road out of town stretched white and endless before him. He rode it with a hollowness in his chest, knowing that survival in a place like Ash Hollow meant turning away. Yet deep within, something old stirred, something he had buried beneath grief and silence. A sense of justice, faint as an ember, gnawed at him. And though Elias told himself he was a man seeking only quiet work, he knew the snow would not bury what he had seen that night. The ranch outside Ash Hollow was little more than a patch of stubborn earth fenced in by wire that sagged beneath the weight of neglect. Elias Carradine took work there not because it promised comfort, but because it promised silence. The owner, an old miner gone half-blind, needed a man to keep the stock fed, the fences mended, the windmill turning. Payment was modest: room in a drafty bunkhouse, beans and coffee, a few coins for his pocket. It was enough. Elias had learned to live on less. His days passed in sameness. At dawn, he stoked the stove, boiled black coffee thick enough to chew, and stepped into the cold with hammer or shovel in hand. The fences split beneath the weather's cruelty, posts leaning like weary soldiers. Elias drove them straight again, his breath fogging the air. When evening came, he sat before the fire, staring into orange coals until memory blurred the present. The emptiness where his wife once was pressed hardest in those hours, the chair she never sat in, the quiet she no longer filled. In the small chest at the foot of his cot lay her folded wedding dress, wrapped in linen. He had carried it across counties, never discarding it, never opening it. It was both weight and tether, a piece of the world that kept him from drifting into nothingness. He sometimes placed his hand on the lid as if it might warm beneath his palm, but it never did. It was in these quiet days that Miriam Pike began to brush the edges of his solitude. She was not a presence that announced itself. Rather, she appeared like a shadow that lengthened across the prairie at dusk. Once he saw her riding past the ranch, leading her mare with a bundle strapped behind her saddle. Her braids caught the last light of the sun, fire glinting off black strands. Another time he glimpsed her in town, trading jars of dried roots and herbs at the store. She spoke little, nodded once, and was gone. The townsfolk avoided her as though she carried pestilence. Men spat in the dust after she passed. Women turned shoulders. They called her cursed, though no one dared to name the curse outright. Children, however, were less bound by malice. Elias saw two girls trailing after her once, following her shawl as though it were a banner. Miriam turned, crouched, and pressed a sprig of sage into their hands. The girls ran off laughing, and Miriam disappeared back into the prairie shadows. Elias found himself watching, though he told himself it was only curiosity. One evening, as he came in from repairing a broken hinge on the barn, a boy from town approached the bunkhouse. His cheeks were red from the cold, his boots dusted with snow. In his hands he carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. Without speaking, the boy thrust it toward Elias. "She told me to give you this," the boy muttered. Inside lay a whetstone, smooth and worn from use, along with an old wooden-handled tool, its edge sharpened with care. "Who told you?" Elias asked, though he already guessed. The boy shrugged. "The half-blood woman. She said your axe sang wrong. Then he turned and ran back down the trail before Elias could press further. Elias stood in the doorway, the bundle heavy in his hands. He thought of the axe leaning against the barn, blade dulled from years of work. He had indeed heard the sour ring each time it struck wood, but he had paid it no mind. Somehow, Miriam had noticed. Somehow she had chosen to act, to give, without stepping inside his solitude or asking thanks. It unsettled him. That night by the fire, Elias turned the whetstone over in his hand, feeling its grit. He sharpened the axe until its edge gleamed silver in the glow, but all the while a restlessness worked in him. He had lived these last years believing no one saw him, believing he was a man unworthy of notice or protection. Yet Miriam had seen. She had offered something without word or expectation, and had pierced the armor of silence he had forged around himself. Sleep did not come easy. When it did, dreams came hard. He saw again the blizzard that had taken his wife, snow swallowing the world, his lantern useless against the storm. He had wrapped her in blankets, carried her through the white roar, but her breath had faded against his chest before they reached shelter. He had dug her grave with hands stiff and numb, each shovelful of frozen earth a condemnation. He had spoken no prayer, for words failed him. Only silence marked her passing. Other nights, the dreams carried him back to his son. The boy had been nearly grown 17 when Elias returned from the war. The son's eyes had been full of fury. "You left us," he had said. "You marched off chasing glory while mother lay sick." When Elias tried to explain, the boy spat a single word, "Coward," before walking away. He had not seen him since. These shadows clung to Elias's waking hours. By day, he worked. By night, he endured. Yet Miriam's silent gestures gnawed at him in a different way. Once he spotted her at the edge of the prairie at sunset, gathering wood. She moved with a calm steadiness, her shawl drawn close against the cold. The scars along her neck caught the dying light, and for a moment Elias saw not ruin but resilience, as if each mark declared survival rather than defeat. He wondered what storms she had weathered, what fire had branded her, what exile had shaped her silence. He wondered if she too carried a burden folded away like his wife's dress, too painful to discard, too sacred to forget. For the first time in years, Elias felt the fragile stirrings of something he had thought long dead, a recognition perhaps that he was not alone in his exile, that there was another who endured the cruel weight of being cast aside, yet walked still, unbowed. The storm rolled in from the west with the suddenness of a thrown curtain. The sky darkened, swollen with bruised clouds, and wind tore through the prairie grass in long, restless waves. Elias Carradine had been mending a stretch of fence when he caught the first low rumble. By the time he reached the barn, rain had begun to fall in thick sheets, pelting the earth with a sound like hooves drumming. He led the bay inside, rubbed him down, and secured the door against the gale. Lightning split the sky, white veins across, blackness, followed by a crash that shook the rafters. The storm was the kind that made a man feel small and mortal, as though the heavens had decided to remind the earth of its place. On the road beyond the pasture, Elias glimpsed movement through the blur of rain. A rider struggled against the storm. As the figure drew closer, he recognized the dark shawl, the braids plastered to her shoulders. Miriam Pike. Her mare stumbled, favoring a leg, and she dismounted, tugging uselessly at the reins. Elias cursed, under his breath, knowing already what choice lay before him. He crossed the yard, reins striking like nails, and reached her side. "Your mare's lame," he said above the storm. Miriam only nodded, water dripping from her lashes. Her face was pale but steady, no fear in her eyes. "Come," Elias said, taking the reins from her hand. "You'll not last out here." Against every instinct to remain apart, he led her toward the house. Inside, the ranch house smelled of damp wood and smoke. Elias lit a lantern, set it on the table, and fed kindling to the hearth until flames crackled. Shadows leapt against the walls. Miriam stood dripping by the door, shawl clutched around her shoulders, her presence at once unsettling and strangely steadying. "Hang it near the fire," Elias said, gesturing to her shawl. She obeyed without a word, laying the wet fabric across the back of a chair. Beneath it her blouse clung, revealing the ridges of old scars that trailed down her throat and collarbone. Elias turned away quickly, busying himself with the stove, though the image lingered sharp as lightning. Miriam moved with quiet assurance as though the house were not foreign. She found the tin of coffee on the shelf, measured grounds with practiced hands, and set water to boil. The smell soon filled the small room, earthy, bitter, comforting. Elias sat at the table, watching her without meaning to. She moved among his few possessions, tools stacked neatly, boots drying near the hearth, the rifle mounted above the mantel, as though she were taking the measure of him without words. Her gaze lingered on the old trunk at the foot of his cot. The linen-wrapped bundle rested atop it, the edges yellowed with years. Elias noticed her eyes settle there and felt a flush of shame. He crossed the room, pulled the wedding dress down, and shoved it inside the trunk before she could speak. "Not yours to look at," he muttered, harsher than he intended. Miriam only inclined her head. "It carries weight," she said softly, and turned back to the coffee. Lightning cracked again, closer this time, striking a tree beyond the barn. The boom shook the glass panes, rattled the dishes. Elias flinched before he could stop himself. Miriam did not move. She stood with her hands steady on the tin cup, eyes calm, as though storms were old companions. "You don't fear it," Elias observed. Her voice was low, nearly lost beneath the storm. "I have known worse than thunder." When she spoke again, it was not in fragments but in a slow unfolding, like a wound left unbandaged at last. She told him of her mother's village, how soldiers and raiders alike had brought fire. She told of her settler father, who had ridden away when whispers of mixed blood marked him with shame. She told of the night they branded her, men pressing heated iron against her skin so she would carry their cruelty forever. "They thought it would silence me," Miriam said. "But scars are not silence, they are survival." The fire snapped in the hearth. Elias sat motionless, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He had thought her fragile because the town named her so. Yet her voice carried no fragility. It carried steel hammered in flame. Outside rain drummed harder against the roof. "You endure," Elias said, though the words felt meager. Miriam looked at him across the lantern glow. "So do you." The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, charged, filled with things neither dared to say. That night Elias slept in the chair by the fire, unwilling to retreat to the cot while she remained under his roof. Dreams came fast. He saw his wife again, her face pale beneath fever's grip, her hand limp in his. He relived the night he lost her, the storm howling outside the cabin, the fire guttering low. He saw his son's back as the boy walked away, shoulders stiff with hatred. But the dream shifted. He heard humming, low, steady, like a thread weaving through darkness. The sound carried him through the grief, softening its sharpness. He woke before dawn. The fire had burned down to embers, lantern dim. Miriam sat near the hearth, wrapped once more in her shawl, humming to herself as she mended a tear in her sleeve. She did not look up when Elias stirred. For the first time in many years, Elias felt the weight of his grief differently. It was not less, but it no longer crushed him alone. The sharp edges had dulled as if shared by another who bore her own scars. He sat quietly, watching her needle move through cloth, and thought that perhaps she was no longer the bait they named her. Perhaps she was the storm that refused to break, unyielding steel forged in fire. The days lengthened into a fragile rhythm. Miriam remained beneath Elias Carradine's roof while her mare rested in the corral, a poultice binding its leg. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the air between them, charged, unsettled, carrying both warmth and distance. She rose early as he did, moving about the ranch with a quiet competence that unsettled him as much as it steadied him. She helped mend fences, her shawl gathered tight against the prairie wind. She plaited rope from rawhide, her fingers deft, braiding strength into every strand. She patched his worn coat, leather needles in her steady hands, and asked for nothing in return. Elias found himself watching the way her hands worked, the way she carried silence as if it were a tool rather than a burden. She never sought thanks. She did not seem to need it. In the evenings, after the day's labor, she would sit in the old rocking chair near the fire. The chair had creaked beneath his wife once, long ago, but now Miriam occupied it as if it had been waiting. Her shawl draped about her shoulders, like armor, shadows flickering across her scarred face, while Elias sat sharpening tools at the table. The rasp of stone on steel filled the hush between them, strangely companionable. Yet beyond the ranch, unease stirred. In town, whispers grew, like weeds. Men muttered that Elias harbored a cursed woman. Women crossed themselves when Miriam's name was spoken. "She'll bring raiders down on us," some said. Others spat the word half-blood as if it soured the tongue. The branding scars upon her neck were recited like scripture, proof of unworthiness. The tension pressed against the ranch like a gathering storm. One evening, as they sat in firelight, Elias spoke the thought that had gnawed at him. "Why do you endure their hatred?" His voice was rough, breaking the quiet like a misfired shot. Miriam looked up slowly from the shawl she was mending. Her gaze held no anger, no plea. "Because I still live," she said. "That is enough to anger them." The words struck Elias like a hammer. He turned back to the blade in his hand, unable to answer. It was 2 days later when the riders came. Elias heard them before he saw them, hooves pounding against hard ground, the jangle of bridles, voices raised. He stepped from the barn, rifle slung across his arm, as 3 men approached through the dust. Their faces were taut with drink and grievance. "You've taken in trouble, Carradine," the tallest called. "That woman don't belong under your roof. You'll hand her over now or we'll fetch her ourselves." Miriam stood in the doorway of the house, shawl wrapped around her like a shield, face unreadable. Elias planted his boots in the dirt. "She stays." The men shifted in their saddles, taken aback by the flatness of his tone. The tall one sneered. "You want her curse on your land? You'll regret it, Carradine. She's bait. Always was, always will be." Elias raised the rifle, not aimed yet, but steady. "You'll ride off my land. Now." For a moment the yard held its breath. Wind carried the smell of horses and sweat, the creak of leather, the faint crackle of the fire inside. The men weighed their chances. Finally, with mutters and threats, they wheeled their mounts and rode back the way they came, dust clouding their retreat. The silence afterward felt heavier than the confrontation itself. Miriam stepped from the doorway, her hands clenched around her shawl. Her face was pale, though her eyes burned steady. "They will be back," she said. Elias lowered the rifle slowly. "Let them come." She shook her head. "You don't understand. I cannot stay. I will not bring ruin on another man's life." Words cut deeper than she knew. Elias opened his mouth, closed it again. What was he to say? That her presence stirred something in him he had thought long buried? That the sight of her scars made him think of his own, though his were hidden beneath skin and silence? That turning her away now would be another failure to add to the ledger he already carried? He said nothing. Miriam looked at him a moment longer, as though searching his face for an answer unspoken. Then she drew her shawl tighter, turned and went back inside. That night, Elias sat long by the fire, tools untouched. The rocking chair creaked as Miriam moved restlessly, her shadow stretching across the walls. The air was thick with what had passed between them, with what neither dared to voice. Elias thought of his wife's wedding dress folded away, of his son's accusing eyes, of the word coward still echoing in memory. He had told himself that protecting Miriam was nothing but duty, the same as feeding stock or mending fence. But deep inside, he knew better. Protecting her was not charity. It was the first thing that had made him feel alive in years. When he glanced at Miriam, she sat with her shawl wrapped close, rocking slow, her face caught in firelight. Not fragile, not broken. Scarred steel that endured. For the first time, Elias wondered if her presence was not the ruin of his life, but the beginning of its repair. The night fell heavy, pressing against the windows of the ranch house. The wind carried with it a sound Elias Carradine had come to dread, the distant thunder of hooves, too many to be chance riders, too many to ignore. When he stepped outside, lantern held high, he saw them cresting the ridge, settlers with torches raised, their faces lit in a hellish glow. Fire against darkness, fury against silence. "They've come back," Miriam said behind him. Her shawl was drawn close, her braids trailing down her shoulders like dark rivers. She did not tremble. Elias led her inside. He barred the door, checked the rifle, and laid another on the table. The fire in the hearth threw long shadows across the walls, twisting their shapes into something larger, more defiant than the flesh that cast them. "They'll want blood tonight," Elias said, voice low. "Then let them see ours still runs," Miriam answered. The words settled into him like iron. Outside, the riders circled. Their shouts rose above the wind, calling Miriam's name, spitting slurs, demanding she come out. Boots struck against the porch. The door shuddered as a fist slammed against it. Elias raised the rifle, barrel steady. "If they breach, we hold them here." Miriam stood beside him, a hand resting on the wood of the other rifle. She did not lift it, but her presence was as strong as steel. As the mob's rage swelled, something within Elias cracked. He could not hold it any longer, the weight of years, the silence of his guilt. He spoke, his voice harsh, the words scraping out of him like rocks torn from the earth. "I failed her," he said. "My wife. She begged me to keep her warm, to hold her through the fever. I thought the storm would pass. I thought, God help me, I thought she would live. I went for wood, left her alone. When I came back, she was gone. Dead, cold, in the bed. And my son, he called me coward, said I ran from the war and from her both. He walked away and never returned. I have lived every day since in silence because it's all I deserve." The confession fell heavy between them, heavier than the pounding on the door. Elias lowered the rifle, chest heaving. The fire popped, a coal breaking apart. Miriam's eyes did not soften. She did not speak comfort. Instead, she gave him something harder, truer. "Survival is not measured by those you lose," she said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the noise outside. "It is measured by whether you keep standing after. The ones who branded me wanted me to disappear. I did not. The ones who hate me want me silent. I am not. And you." She took a step closer, her scars catching the firelight. "You are still here. That is not cowardice, that is survival." Her words struck deeper than any sermon Elias had ever heard. For the first time in years, he felt as though someone had seen the man beneath the silence, beneath the guilt, and called him still living. Outside, the mob grew restless. Torches hissed in the snow, boots crunched closer. Someone shouted, "Drag her out!" Elias raised the rifle again. His hands no longer shook. He fired a single shot through the window, the report splitting the night. The round buried itself in the snow at the rider's feet, throwing powder into the firelight. The crowd stilled. Miriam stepped forward then, shawl pulled tight, and unlatched the door. Before Elias could stop her, she opened it and stood in the frame, fire behind her, torchlight before. Her scars gleamed against her skin, each line a story of fire endured. She faced them with steady eyes, unflinching, her voice calm though the night roared around her. "You call me bait," she said, loud enough for the men to hear. "But you are the ones caught, snared by your own fear. I carry scars, and you carry hate. Only one of these can kill a soul." The torches sputtered in the wind. One man shifted uneasily in his saddle. Another spat, but his eyes would not meet hers. Elias stood behind her, rifle raised, firelight cutting his figure into the dark. Slowly the mob faltered. One by one their bravado drained away, torches lowered. The tall one who had led them before cursed under his breath, yanked his reins, and wheeled his horse. The others followed, muttering, their silhouettes shrinking against the snow-swept horizon until only the wind remained. Miriam closed the door gently as though it had never been struck. She leaned her forehead against the wood for a moment, breathing steady. Elias lowered the rifle, the strength leaving his arms all at once. Relief came not in shouts, not in laughter, but like ice thawing on a spring morning. Slow, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. They did not embrace. They did not speak. But the silence that filled the room was no longer the silence of exile. It was the silence of two souls standing unbroken side by side. The fire burned lower, its glow softening across the room. Elias sat at the table, hands resting on the wood, and watched Miriam sink into the rocking chair. Her shawl lay heavy around her shoulders, her braids damp with sweat and melted snow. She looked into the fire, and for once he felt no need to look away from her scars. For the first time in years, Elias felt a warmth that did not come only from the hearth. It rose from within, fragile but alive, kindled not by memory of what he had lost, but by the presence of another who had refused to yield. The fire between them did not burn them down, it kept them standing. Morning broke with a hushed stillness, the kind only snow could bring. Ash Hollow lay muted under a fresh white veil, the land softened, the cruelties of the night hidden for a moment beneath quiet grace. Smoke rose thinly from chimneys, but no one stirred along the road. The world seemed to hold its breath as though waiting to see what might follow the fire and fury of the hours before. Elias Carradine rose before dawn. He moved about the ranch house like a man bound by decision, every motion carrying the weight of departure. His saddle lay ready, rifle slung across the horn. He packed little, coffee, bread, and the folded wedding dress in its cedar chest. He closed the lid on it one last time, his fingers resting against the grain. For years it had been his chain. Today, it felt no heavier than memory. He told himself it was better this way. Miriam Pike deserved more than a hollow man with nothing left to offer but silence and scars. She had faced a mob and did not break. She deserved a life unshadowed by another's grief. He would ride out, leave her free of his ruin, and let the snow cover his tracks as though he had never been. Horse stamped in the cold, steam rising from its nostrils. Elias adjusted the cinch, his breath clouding the air. That was when he saw her. Miriam stood by the corral fence, shawl pulled close, her braids dark against the pale morning. She looked neither weary nor afraid. Her gaze was steady, as if she had been waiting for him all along. "You mean to go?" she said, not as question, but as certainty. Elias rested his hand on the saddle horn. "It's better for you if I do." Her head tilted slightly, the faintest trace of sorrow touching her eyes, though her voice remained calm. "You think me afraid of the road, or of you. I am not. What I fear is the silence, alone. I have lived too many years in it already." The words caught in him, like reins pulled taut. He turned away, staring at the sweep of snow across the prairie. His chest ached with the truth of it. He had thought himself unworthy of company, doomed to exile, yet here she was, speaking his own fear aloud, unashamed. "Miriam," he said, his voice rough, "I've nothing left to give. My hands mend fences, boil coffee, keep the fire. That is all." She stepped closer, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots. "Then let that be enough. Scars against scars, silence against silence. Not as guest, not as burden. As one who chooses to stand beside you." The wind stirred her shawl, brushing its fringe against his coat. He looked down at her, truly looked. Past the marks burned into her flesh, past the names the town spat at her. What he saw was endurance, unyielding as stone, unbroken as steel drawn from fire. Something within him gave way, not with a crack, but with a quiet release, as though the weight of years had slipped at last from his shoulders. He extended his hand, not in command, not in pity, but as offering. Miriam accepted without hesitation. Her fingers were cool, steady, fitting into his palm like they had been waiting. No more was said. She mounted behind him, her hands resting lightly at his waist, the shawl warm against his back. Elias felt her breath near his shoulder, calm, unhurried. For the first time in many winters, he did not feel alone on the horse's back. The road stretched before them, white and endless beneath the falling snow. Behind them, Ash Hollow receded, its cruelties, its whispers, its fires swallowed by distance. Ahead lay nothing certain, nothing promised, only the chance of miles shared and burdens halved. They rode in silence, but it was a silence different from before. Not the silence of graves, not the silence of shame, but the quiet of understanding. Two lives scarred yet unbroken, choosing to carry on together. Elias felt the folded dress in the chest behind him, no longer a shackle, no longer a curse. His wife's memory remained, but it no longer chained him to despair. Miriam's shawl pressed warm against him, a presence not of the past but of the present, of breath and blood and unyielding will. The snow fell steady, covering their tracks, cleansing the scars of the land as it did the scars of their hearts. The prairie stretched wide and white, the horizon infinite. Elias did not know where the road would lead, nor what storms might yet break against them. But as Miriam's hands held steady at his waist as her shawl wrapped them both against the cold, he felt the stirrings of something he had thought forever lost. It was not joy yet, not peace, but it was enough. They rode on, two shadows against, the snow carrying with them silence, scars, and the fragile beginning of a life shared.